Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Mike Singer of blueandgold.com, joined by my esteemed colleagues, Patrick Engel and Lou Samoji. Special podcast episode here, not quite an emergency pod, but one where we certainly have a lot going on and we needed to discuss some topics. First, if you are watching us on YouTube, please go ahead and give us a like, hit that thumbs up button, and subscribe. That really helps us out a ton when you like and subscribe to us on YouTube. And if you're prefer just the audio route and you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you listen to this show, you can go to anchor.fm /blue and gold. And this is our new podcast host, and there's a button for a bunch of different places you can listen to our podcast, as well as supporting the page and even leaving us a voice message, which is an interesting little thing. You guys, if you have feedback, you can actually record a voice message, and we could maybe play your question on a future episode. We're going to start this mini podcast here with discussing what the news was. And then we'll get into shortly the impact of the news. So I'll throw it to Lou first. What's been the rundown of scheduling news here this week?
Well, I don't think anyone was surprised that Notre Dame joined forces with the Atlantic Coast Conference for the 2020 season. I think that's been out there for a couple of months. There was never any panic once the Wisconsin and USC and Stanford games were canceled that there would be a shortage of games or that Notre Dame would be left out in the cold. I think the anticipation all along was that they would be able to add the Atlantic Coast Conference games. And as far back, I think it's been about at least 2-3 weeks. I was hearing from somebody pretty close to the program that Notre Dame will be part of the ACC championship as well. And I know there may have been some initial skepticism about that, but Jack Swarbrick, the athletic director, has been confident all along that that partnership was going to be so prominent right now. And we see it is. They added, in addition to the 6 ACC games they already had scheduled, they added 4 more. Plus, you have the +1 non-conference schedule. So the two additions at home are going to be Florida State and Syracuse. And then the 2 additions on the road will be at Boston College and North Carolina. So there's your 10 conference games. And for the first time in 133 years of Notre Dame football, they're going to be vying for a conference championship. Some might say this might be leaving the door or leading the pathway to full membership down the road. I've been kind of the opinion that by the time 2030 rolls around, the next decade, that may very well come to fruition, and maybe this is the initial step toward that.
Now, Patrick, Lou mentioned looking at 10 conference games plus 1 non-conference game. And on Thursday, July 30th, news kind of broke that Arkansas will definitely not be one of those teams Notre Dame potentially plays.
That's right. And the SEC is going to a 10-game conference-only schedule, which wipes out the chance that Notre Dame's +1 game is that originally scheduled September 12th game against Arkansas in South Bend. So Notre Dame has a couple options for that one non-conference game. Either you still have Navy and Western Michigan on the schedule, or if so choose, it could be someone entirely new, although, of course, with more and more leagues going to conference-only schedules, new teams aren't exactly going to be rich in supply, basically. But if Notre Dame and Navy are going to play for the 94th straight year, there's going to have to be some adjustments made to that game date and location yet again. We know it was already moved from Dublin on August 29th to September 5th or 6th in Annapolis, but as part of the ACC's plan, the non-conference game must be played in the state of that ACC team. Notre Dame is not in Maryland. Maryland does not have an ACC team. It can't be played there. And the September 5th or 6th window is outside of the earliest possible start, which the ACC said is the week of September 7 to 12. So if Navy wants to continue and Notre Dame wants to continue, it's going to have to ask Navy to move the game to somewhere in Indiana, which at this point with no fans and all of that, it doesn't really make sense to try to put it in Indianapolis or something like that. So logically, you can just put it in South Bend, and it would have to move to later in the season. So that's where that one kind of stands right now. It certainly seems and stands to reason that that's the one that Notre Dame would want to try to keep just to preserve the tradition and the rivalry there. But it's going to require some more adjustments, particularly on Navy's end, to have to give up the home game this year. Of course, Notre Dame hosts Navy next year. That's one of 7 home games for Notre Dame. If Notre Dame would be willing, which is the big question, the easy thing would be to do is just flip those, have Navy come to Notre Dame in 2020, Notre Dame go to Navy in 2021. That would still leave Notre Dame with 6 home games. One of the road games would be at Soldier Field, which would hardly be described as a road game. But
That would be,
of course, there's a lot more to sort through there, which...
Yeah, and we discussed this yesterday, Patrick. I mean, from the outside looking in, it doesn't look like a bad deal for Navy to visit Notre Dame a second straight year, especially because had Notre Dame gone for that historic first ever meeting at Annapolis this year, there would have been a crowd restriction. I think it would have taken something away from it, possibly. And I'm just theorizing, I'm speaking in hypotheticals here, but if Navy would be willing to come back again this year to Notre Dame, where it would be basically limited capacity, and then maybe Navy next year could host Notre Dame in Annapolis as a trade-off with, we hope, would be a full capacity, and which would make that game all the more appealing on their side as well.
And exactly to your point, I asked Navy coach Ken Niumatalolo about this last month, I believe it was, or earlier in July, who knows anymore. And I asked him, all right, what do you think about the idea of playing Notre Dame on campus for the first time in the series history? And he said, I don't really, it's hard to get excited about considering just the general precarious state of the season and that there's not really going to be many fans, if any fans in the stands to create any kind of home field advantage or whatever that he had talked up as being a thing that's been fun when Navy's biggest home games in recent years, considering the success that they've had. So it could be a nice little bone to throw Navy on Notre Dame's end of here. You can host it, fill up your stadium, all of this, and perhaps in exchange, maybe the bigger thing for Notre Dame, instead of playing a 7th home game, is a 7th game with NBC. If it ends up being a thing where, hey, you still give us Notre Dame can say, and this is all just my own kind of guesswork here that makes some common sense, but of course is yet to all be sorted through, and who knows exactly how interested either side is in any of these ideas. But if you're Notre Dame, you could say, okay, we can flip these dates. Let us keep NBC. So we have 7 NBC games in 2021, even though it'll be a road game for you, Navy. You can keep ESPN. And when it comes to South Bend in 2020, considering you move it there. And, okay, Notre Dame has the 6 home games plus 1 road game in Chicago, an hour and a half away, friendly territory, not far, all of that. Even though it's in Chicago, that's against Wisconsin. Wisconsin's technically the home team there. And what really seems like a bigger deal for Notre Dame is getting the 7 NBC games. We know that Notre Dame has had its 7 home dates, technically home games, that they've been willing to punt one away is somewhere in an NFL stadium for the Shamrock Series. So in theory, you're all right with playing only 6 games in Notre Dame Stadium, if history is any kind of indication. So those are the kind of parts that would need to be adjusted, need to move around if Navy and Notre Dame are going to play again. It's a lot harder than just saying, all right, Western Michigan, if you're in, we'll host you. We'll pay your $1.175 million. If you just do this, which of course Western Michigan would say yes, but certainly doesn't have the appeal and the pizzazz of playing Navy again and the rivalry and what that means to the history of both.
We will next discuss the schedule and how this just ACC +1 affects Notre Dame's chances to compete for national championship. We'll be back after this quick break. All right, we're back, and it is time to discuss this new schedule in depth and get our takes on it. But I guess, first of all, we are our staff writers, we're very much on board with Navy over Western Michigan then as that +1 game. Is that right?
I would prefer to see it.
I would bet that the majority of the message board would not be, though, because there is very much a distaste for the Navy option style, and it almost is like a week of preparation for a whole foreign concept,
Right.
as opposed to playing Western Michigan, which is an automatic win. And look, Notre Dame easily handled Navy last year, and that was a very good Navy team that finished 11-2. But overall, Navy presents a lot more problems than Western Michigan could, both from a preparation standpoint and a competitive standpoint.
So for the season, we don't have the dates yet in terms of where Notre Dame's playing this team on this date. There is a window for the ACC championship game, and I know that the ACC said, look, there's no divisions. It is the two highest winning percentage teams will make the conference championship game. So I'll throw it to Patrick first. Notre Dame stock up, down, just about the same in terms of if all of this actually happens, what are Notre Dame's chances to reach the college football playoff like compared to 6 months ago?
Absolutely up. And what I'm about to say is going to blow a lot of people's minds, especially if there's any non-Notre Dame folks listening to this for whatever reason. Notre Dame's schedule got easier by joining a conference. I mean, everybody loves to say they ain't played nobody because they're not in a conference. So in the 10 ACC games on Notre Dame's schedule, the average opponent S&P plus rank is 55. Now that's 10th in the ACC when you look at every team's new schedule. Before, the average rank was 49.5. And that 55 is only with the ACC teams in there. If you add Navy was, I believe, 55th in the preseason SP plus. It's not going to drop that down to 49.5 and make the schedule harder. So Notre Dame's schedule got easier. If it's easier, it means it's easier to go undefeated, or at least by percentage, purely speaking. It's not like this is a schedule full of 10 cupcakes. And the more games you win, or if you win them all, the better chance you have of going to the playoff or going to the New Year's Six, or especially if there's momentum for an 18 playoff to try to recoup money and get rid of a lot of the problems that would come up with trying to figure out if 8-2 in the SEC is better than 9-1 in the ACC and all that, because we don't have any non-conference games that are comparison points. But anyway, so Notre Dame still gets the 6 initial ACC games it had on the original schedule, which the hardest one was Clemson. That's, of course, still there. That's an obstacle. Adding at North Carolina has potential to be some tripwire, and, of course, Pitt on the original schedule. On this one, still a game that everybody kind of talks about is, all right, this could be a tricky upset pick. Florida State, I don't know, has been particularly good the last 3 years, but is not exactly light on NFL talent right now. But anyway, I don't think it's at all out of the question. In fact, I would say it's pretty likely that Notre Dame is favored in every game except the Clemson game. I don't think you could have said that about the original schedule. I would have been pretty confident in USC being the favorite in LA and Wisconsin being a 2 or 3 point favorite or something at Lambeau Field. And even if, all right, it's a push or Notre Dame swings to UNC minus 1 point the week of that game, it's not like at any point UNC is going to be some touchdown favorite unless there's a 2016 style Notre Dame meltdown. But anyway, Notre Dame has to get past. It can still lose to Clemson and make the title game. Just be among the top 2 win percentages. And if anyone who's buying the, Pitt, North Carolina, even Louisville kind of sleeper chances of being that second team, Notre Dame plays them all, which on one hand you would think, okay, it's a hard schedule, but no, it's not like any of these are, preseason top 10 teams or anything like that. So if Notre Dame takes care of business in those 3 games and those 3 teams end up being maybe the 3 through 5 or somewhere in there and in the final ACC standings, it's Notre Dame would have the tiebreakers. If it beats all of them, would see presumably Clemson again in the ACC title game. If you win that, well, you're going to have a pretty good resume with 1 loss and a win over Clemson, who we can all assume, I think, will be a force once again. And there you go. That's your playoff path. Where, of course, you feel pretty good about when you're a 1-loss conference champion. We know that those have generally been treated pretty favorably in the playoff era, where let's say, all right, Notre Dame would have gone 10-2. All right, you're not making the playoff there. Let's even say Notre Dame will go 11-1 against the original 2020 schedule. A lot of things have to happen. Depends on really where everybody else finishes. It's not impossible, of course, as we've seen, for an 11-1 team to make the playoff, but not a guarantee at all either. But anyway, I think there's just an absolutely kind of clearer path that Notre Dame can look at the schedule and say, if we do this, we're in. And if we reach this game even, we're in. Or, hey, we can drop this game, but as long as we get here and win this game or win one of these games, you'd think, all right, if Notre Dame is going to finish with 1 loss, you think it's probably going to play Clemson twice, and that means it beats Clemson once. So if that happens, I think you got to feel pretty good about Notre Dame's chances of going to the playoff.
I think the demarcation this year for the Notre Dame season is if you don't make the ACC championship game, that's going to be a disappointment. I think right now the initial reaction among most Notre Dame followers is that Notre Dame is number 2 on that list of the 15 ACC teams. Clemson is the clear number 1. And the best evidence of this over the last 3 years, Clemson is 41-3. You know what the next best record is
in conference, right?
Yes.
Of just conference foe. Is that counting?
41-3 overall. That's
Okay.
Clemson's record, and they're 23-1 in the conference.
Okay.
That's not even including the ACC championship games. So they're 41-3. You know who has the next best record over those 3 years in the ACC? It's 23-16. That's
who is that?
Disparity. That's a tie among Wake Forest, which has never been a powerhouse, Virginia Tech, and Miami.
Schools that are down.
Everything else. I mean, you look at Florida State, 18-20. They've been underachieving tremendously. But so you look at that gulf there between 41 wins and 23 wins over the last 3 years. And then you look at Notre Dame which is 33-6 the past 3 years, which is the 6th best in all of the 130 team FBS. I think the overwhelming majority of people are looking at this as a Notre Dame versus Clemson match.
Twice.
Yeah.
If the season goes like it should on paper right now, which, I mean, the past few weeks there's just been so much changes, it seems like every day, but if it goes as expected, Notre Dame should play Clemson twice this fall.
Yeah, and look, what happened the last 3 years is inconsequential to 2020. But I'm just saying, I mentioned those teams. Miami, look at how they finished last year. They're real. You look at Wake Forest. The last time Notre Dame played them out there, they put up 56 points in Ian Book's first start. They don't recruit at the level Notre Dame does. Virginia Tech has always been a strong, solid program, but again, they don't recruit at that level. If everything falls in place, it should be a Notre Dame Clemson battle. Now, one thing during the regular season that creates, had Notre Dame defeated Clemson in the regular season with what was the original schedule in 2020, there is absolute rapture, because then you think you're in the college football playoff. If you do it now, it's like, oh crap, we got to play them again in the ACC championship game. What's that like, beating them twice? On the other hand, if Notre Dame does lose to Clemson during the regular season, there's an outlook of, hey, you know what? Maybe we can get a second chance. And it's tough to beat a good team a second time in December. If we get that far, hopefully, then that creates the positive element of it. So there's the pros and cons on both.
I would think you'd much rather lose to Clemson in the regular season and beat them in the title game.
Of course. Because
have the conference champion thing in there, then beat them in the regular season, lose to them in the title game, and say, all right,
probably not making the playoff.
No, probably not in a 14 format. No. And I would certainly, like I said, I think we're going to end up seeing an 18 playoff. It just kind of makes too much sense as far as not trying to decipher conferences when you have no common data points and the need to recoup some money that everybody loses. But
so it's an 8-team playoff. Then if Notre Dame and Clemson both have a loss apiece and each defeated the other, they may meet a third time.
Yeah, exactly.
Or knock each other out. Who knows at that point?
Ollie Frazier 3.
Well, one team that Notre Dame will face, again, as of now, who knows what this is even going to look like next week, let alone this fall, is Boston College. And they have Phil Jurkovec, who, of course, played at Notre Dame for a couple seasons before transferring there. He had an interesting moment on social media about not too long before we started recording here. He didn't post it himself, but he reshared it on his Instagram page, and it was a image of Phil. I'm going to pull it up here on my phone so I don't yes, I was just about to say, and I was like, wait, is that really what it was? And I'm going to show it to our video audience here. It's Phil Jurkovec behind bars, and Brian Kelly is standing in front of him. And Phil shared that on his Instagram page. Do you guys have much of a reaction to that Jurkovec, posting that and not being able to play this year as a transfer?
I was surprised he did that because I don't know what you really gain from that. You just, in these situations when you transfer like that, it's better just to, I think, have that low profile and let your play do the talking itself. If he wants to beat Notre Dame that badly, that's understandable, and then he can talk afterwards. But doing it beforehand, I don't know what really you have to gain from that.
Well, I can tell you what it certainly suggests is that he's applying for a waiver to be immediately eligible this year, and Notre Dame is not really supporting it. That's what I immediately thought when you see that image, that we know if there's support from the previous institution from which a player transfers, you are a lot more likely to get an instant eligibility waiver. Of course, it helps to have a high-powered lawyer and some of those things, or be a highly ranked quarterback. Of course, the latter, Phil certainly is. I don't know, who he's hired as a lawyer, or even know exactly, the particulars of how supportive Notre Dame is. But when I saw that, the first thing I thought is Notre Dame isn't exactly trying to help him be eligible this year. So certainly adds a degree of spiciness to the game.
It does. It already had a good bit of spiciness, but if he is eligible to play, and man, if he starts that game, oh man, that'll be.
Yeah, I just don't understand how this functions, because you have JT Daniel, he transfers and he's immediately granted eligibility from USC to Georgia. You had the same with Justin Fields going from Georgia to Ohio State. Look, even at Boston College, they had a slot receiver last year at Ohio State, Jalen Gill, who is in Phil Jurkovec's class, and he was the number 41 ranked player in Rivals. He applied for a waiver too, and he received it. He's eligible this year, and I don't know what the mystery or holdup there is.
With the NCAA, you expect the unexpected with the NCAA. They just kind of do things off the cuff.
We never know who's going to get a waiver under what circumstances. It's completely random as far as who gets them and who doesn't. But Yeah, if you're a highly ranked quarterback and have a good lawyer, that's two pretty good things you have going for you right there.
Well, if you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and subscribe on YouTube. And again, if you're listening via podcast, go to anchor.fm/blue and gold. And again, you can leave us a voice message with your feedback of the show, and you can even ask us a question that could appear in a future podcast episode. Of course, go to blueandgold.com. If you like this talk, this banter here between the three of us, we have this every day at blueandgold.com on our message board, Rockies Roundtable. We dialogue with our subscribers on the message board daily. Thousands of posts we have throughout the course of the year talking with our subscribers. So please use promo code Irish60, and that'll get you 60 days free of access at blueandgold.com. Again, free of charge. And you can communicate with us and thousands of other Notre Dame fans.